I came home unannounced. No text, no call, no warning that I was coming back. The driveway was quiet, the house perfectly still, a postcard image of suburban calm. But when I opened the garage door, the calm shattered. The air hit me like a furnace. A blast of suffocating heat rolled out thick enough to choke me, 95 degrees inside, maybe more. My lungs seized for a second, my skin prickled with sweat instantly, and then I saw him. My grandfather, 90 years old, a decorated veteran who had once stood tall in uniform, now slumped in a rusted folding chair like a forgotten relic. His face glistened with sweat, his lips cracked, and every shallow breath sounded like gravel scraping against stone. His eyes flickered when they found me, not with fear, not even with hope. No, what I saw was something that cut me deeper than any wound I'd ever taken on duty resignation. The badge on my chest suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, because what I had walked into wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just careless. It was cruelty. And the cruelest part, it was inside my own family's home. I rushed forward, calling out Grandpa. My voice cracked as I touched his shoulder. His skin burned under my palm and panic jolted through me. I slid my arms under him, shocked at how light he felt, how brittle his frame had become. As I lifted him, a weak whisper rasped from his throat, "Don't trouble yourself." That broke me. Carrying him inside into the cool of the air-conditioned living room, the contrast nearly knocked me breathless. The leather couch, the polished shelves lined with expensive whiskey, the flat screen paused on some travel show. It was all comfort, luxury, ease. And in the middle of it all, my grandfather had been left to roast in a concrete box. I laid him down, carefully fumbling for a throw blanket, even though he was already overheated. His hand, trembling, found mine. That grip, feeble yet deliberate, anchored me in a way nothing else could. "I've got you," I whispered. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I understood. And in that silence, my mind screamed. Memories collided, the afternoons he taught me to ride my bike, his proud smile when I graduated the academy, the quiet talks about service and sacrifice. This man had carried me through my life, and my parents had locked him away like yesterday's trash. I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad, wanting to dial 911, wanting to report what I knew in my heart was elder abuse. But I stopped. My training told me something else. This wasn't just a call for paramedics. This was bigger. This demanded a reckoning. And as the hum of the air conditioner filled the room, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my parents had crossed a line, and I was going to make sure they never crossed it again. When I placed Grandpa gently on the couch, the air conditioning hummed steadily, wrapping him in the comfort he had been denied. His breathing was shallow, his chest rising and falling like fragile waves. I crouched beside him, watching sweat bead along his hairline and drip onto the pillow. For a moment, I just sat there, holding his hand, trying to quiet the storm inside my head. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Not for him. Not for the man who had given everything. Growing up, my parents were ghosts in my childhood memories. They were always busy chasing money, chasing parties, chasing the next status symbol to post about. If it wasn't a new car, it was a golf membership. If it wasn't a trip to Cabo, it was a wine tasting weekend. Their lives were curated for appearances, polished for other people's admiration. But my real parent was sitting right here, struggling to breathe. Grandpa had been my rock since the beginning. He was the one who made my lunches, who picked me up from school when my parents forgot, who sat at the edge of my bed at night telling me stories of his service. His voice would go quiet when he described the friends he lost overseas, but his eyes always burned with pride when he spoke of the flag. "Honor, kiddo," he would say. "That's the only thing you can't buy, can't fake, and can't replace." I thought about those words now, staring at his frail body. How could people with every material comfort my parents forget that simple truth? I remembered one night in particular. I was 15. I had failed a math test and was terrified of what my parents would say. I sat at the kitchen table, shaking tears spilling down the page as I stared at the red F. Grandpa came in, sat down without a word, and began working through the problems with me. Patient, steady, kind. You're going to make mistakes, he told me. But you'll learn, and that's how you'll get strong. He pushed the paper back to me, his handwriting neat and precise in the margins. Strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from always getting back up. That night, he wasn't just teaching me math, he was teaching me life. I snapped back to the present when I felt his grip twitch against mine. His eyes cracked open, and for the briefest second, I saw the same fire dulled, but not gone. You came back, he rasped. I'll always come back, I whispered. My throat tightened, but I forced my voice to stay steady. You're not alone. Not ever. His eyes closed again, but I knew he heard me. I sat there, anger bubbling, and let my gaze drift around the room. The expensive furniture, the curated decor, all of it screamed wealth and status. But none of it meant a damn thing compared to the man on the couch. My parents. I could already picture them lounging in white resort chairs, drinks in hand, snapping selfies, hashtags, ready, living our best life. They'd be smiling wide, proud of their tans, oblivious to the reality that their own father, their flesh and blood, had been left to suffocate in a garage. I felt the badge at my hip. Being a police officer had taught me many things: procedure, evidence, patience. But it had also sharpened something Grandpa had planted in me years ago, a bone-deep sense of justice. Justice wasn't just about the law. It was about right and wrong, about honoring those who had sacrificed. And right now, I knew my parents had failed that test more miserably than I had ever failed math. I walked into the kitchen, grabbed a glass of cold water, and returned to him. I held it to his lips, careful, tilting it slowly. He took a few sips, his throat working, before sinking back into the pillow. His breath steadied slightly, and for the first time since opening that garage door, I allowed myself to breathe too. I thought about calling my parents, thought about screaming into the phone, demanding how they could do this, but then I realized yelling wouldn't change who they were. They wouldn't feel shame, only annoyance. They'd defend themselves, twist the story, pretend it was an oversight. That was their pattern. No, this needed more than anger. This needed precision, proof, and action. I rose to my feet, determination settling into my bones. I knew where Grandpa kept his documents. He was meticulous, a man of order, of records. Even now, even as his body failed him, his desk would hold the key. As I stepped toward his study, I paused and looked back at him. His eyes were closed, his chest rising gently. And I thought of all the nights he'd stood guard over me when I was sick, when I was scared, when the world felt too big. He had never failed me, and I would not fail him now. I walked into the study, the smell of old wood and paper wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. The desk stood solid, the same one I had sat at as a child doing homework under his watchful eye. I pulled open the drawer, and there it was, the folder marked Power of Attorney. He had signed it years ago, trusting me to act if he could not. My name, his signature, clear binding. I held it in my hands, the weight of responsibility settling over me. This wasn't just paper, it was a promise. I set it down carefully, then pulled out my phone. My lawyer's number glowed on the screen. My finger hovered over it, a deep breath filling my lungs. And then I pressed call. "Hello," came the familiar voice on the other end. "It's time," I said quietly. My eyes drifted back to the living room, to the man who had given me everything. We move forward. Now. And in that moment, the plan and the reckoning truly began. The images wouldn't leave me. Even after I carried him inside, cooled him down, and gave him water, I kept seeing the garage, its shadows, its blistering heat, the way sweat dripped from his forehead like beads of suffering. 95 degrees. That number echoed in my mind like a siren each repetition, a reminder that my parents had locked him away like an inconvenience. I had seen neglect in my line of work before. I had been dispatched to homes where elders sat alone in filth, their children too busy or too selfish to care. But never did I imagine walking into that reality in my own family's home. Never did I imagine my grandfather, my rock, treated like one of those cases I documented and carried in my report folder. Sitting on the couch beside him, I watched his chest rise and fall in fragile rhythms. Every shallow breath sounded like a plea, and though he hadn't said much, his silence spoke volumes. I leaned close, brushing damp strands of hair back from his forehead. "You're safe now," I murmured. My voice was steadier than I felt. His eyelids flickered open, revealing a glimmer of recognition. "Always?" So strong, he whispered, barely audible. A lump caught in my throat. He had called me strong when I graduated the academy, when I earned my badge, when I survived my first dangerous shift. But hearing it now, in this moment of his weakness, felt like both a blessing and a curse. I wanted to rage. I wanted to scream and throw every bottle from those polished shelves against the wall. My parents were sipping cocktails at a country club while their father nearly baked alive in a garage. The injustice clawed at me, each thought sharper than the last. But Grandpa's hand, warm and trembling in mine, held me back. His grip was faint, but the message was clear: don't let anger consume you. Instead, I let the anger refine into purpose. I rose, pacing the room, the weight of the power of attorney folder still in my hand. Its papers whispered with every step, reminding me of the responsibility Grandpa had entrusted to me long before this day. At the time, I had brushed it off, thinking it a formality, a just-in-case gesture. But now, it was the lifeline, his safety net. I returned to him, sitting once more at his side. "Grandpa," I said softly, "do you remember when you signed this? When you told me you trusted me to do what was right?" His lips moved, forming a faint smile. A single nod, slow but certain, followed. That nod sealed my resolve. I imagined my parents' laughter echoing across a polished bar, their glasses clinking, their phones buzzing with likes and comments. They thought the world admired them. They thought their curated image was reality. But what they had forgotten, what they had never truly understood, was that reality had a way of catching up. And this time, it would. I dialed my lawyer again, needing to hear the reassurance in his voice. He answered quickly. "Already working on it," he said. "We'll file first thing tomorrow morning. With your authority as power of attorney, we can secure his care, redirect control, and start the process of holding them accountable." "Good," I said. My voice came out harder than I intended, but I didn't apologize. "This isn't just paperwork. This is protection. For him." "Understood," he replied simply. When I hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long time. The hum of the air conditioner, the ticking of the clock on the wall, even the faint rattle of Grandpa's breath, they all formed a rhythm like a heartbeat, reminding me of what mattered. I glanced at the family photos arranged carefully on the mantel. My parents smiling with politicians, with business partners, with friends in expensive clothes. They had always wanted to be seen, to be admired. But in none of those photos was Grandpa. He was the unseen, the inconvenient, the man who had given them life, but had been erased from their narrative. I took one of the frames in my hand, staring at the hollow smiles. My reflection glared back at me from the glass badge gleaming at my hip. "Not anymore," I whispered. "Your story isn't the only one people will see." As if on cue, Grandpa stirred beside me. His voice cracked a whisper, cutting through the silence. "Don't hate them." I froze, the frame still in my grip. His words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they reminded me of who he was, a man who had endured war-loss hardship and still held compassion in his heart. He wanted forgiveness, or at least restraint. I set the photo down carefully, kneeling beside him once more. "I won't hate them," I promised. "But I will stop them. They don't get to hurt you again." His eyes glistened, a faint nod following. His hand squeezed mine, weak but resolute. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about honor, about ensuring that the man who had once fought for his country would not be forgotten or mistreated by his own blood. The line had been drawn, And with the power of attorney in my possession, the first strike would be mine, not out of vengeance alone, but out of love. I heard the garage door rumble open again hours later. The sun had set, leaving the house cloaked in a dusky stillness, broken only by the hum of the air conditioner and Grandpa's quiet breaths. My heart thudded against my ribs as the sound of tires crunching gravel drew closer. They were home. I sat in the armchair across from the couch where Grandpa rested, the power of attorney folder on my lap, my badge glinting faintly under the lamp. I wasn't just their daughter tonight, I was their reckoning. The front door opened, laughter spilling in ahead of them, bright, careless laughter, the kind reserved for people who believed life had bent to their will. I stood, my spine rigid. "Why are you here?" my mother asked first, her designer heels clicking against the tile. Her eyes darted to the couch where Grandpa stirred weakly, then back to me. A flicker of annoyance, not shame, crossed her face. "We told him to stay out of the garage. He never listens." The words landed like a slap. My father followed his face, ruddy from whiskey, his tie loosened. He spotted the folder in my hands. "What's that?" "His power of attorney," I said evenly. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, steady, controlled, yet vibrating with fury just beneath the surface. My mother scoffed, setting her purse on the counter. "Oh, that old thing, he only gave you that because you begged him. He doesn't know what he's signing half the time." Grandpa shifted, his lips parting, but no sound came out. His frail hand lifted slightly, as if trying to defend me, to defend himself. I moved closer, kneeling beside him, and kissed his forehead. "You don't need to say anything," I whispered. Then I rose, turning back to them. "You left him locked in a garage. 95 degrees. Do you even realize what that could have done? Heat stroke, organ failure, death." My words cut through the air sharp as glass. My father waved a dismissive hand. "You're exaggerating. He was fine. You always dramatize things." Something inside me snapped. I found him drenched in sweat, barely conscious. "That's not fine. That's neglect. That's abuse." Silence fell. Even my mother's scoffing died away. For the first time, the word hung between us like a blade. Abuse. I placed the folder on the coffee table, flipping it open so they could see the signature, the notarized seal, the binding legality. This isn't just my opinion. It's the law. He gave me this authority because he knew one day he might need someone to protect him. And that day is now. My father's face darkened. "You think you're going to take control over us?" I met his glare without flinching. "No. I'm taking control for him. You lost that right when you treated him like an inconvenience." My mother's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Do you have any idea what this will look like? What people will say if they find out?" Her words betrayed her. She wasn't worried about Grandpa. She wasn't even worried about me. She was worried about their image, their country club, their friends, their carefully crafted facade. "That's your concern?" I asked quietly. "Not his life, not his dignity?" No one answered. The silence was louder than shouting, and for the first time, I saw something shift in their expressions. Not guilt, not yet, but fear. Fear that the story they had built was crumbling. I leaned forward, my voice firm. "This isn't a negotiation. Tomorrow morning, legal papers will be filed. His finances, his care, his living arrangements, all of it will be under my authority. And if you try to fight me, I'll take this further. You'll be explaining yourselves in court under oath with photographs and medical reports backing every word." Their laughter was gone now. My father's jaw clenched, my mother's hands fidgeted with her necklace. The house, once echoing with their arrogance, had grown painfully quiet. And in that silence, I felt something shift in me too. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was leading, protecting, becoming the granddaughter he had trusted me to be. I glanced back at Grandpa. His eyes were half open, watching me. A faint smile touched his lips, and though he said nothing, I knew what it meant. Pride. The kind of pride no country club cocktail, no Instagram post could ever buy. The morning came heavy with silence. I barely slept my ears, tuned to every shift of Grandpa's breathing through the night. Dawn crept across the curtains, painting the living room in pale gold. I made coffee in the kitchen, the bitterness sharp on my tongue, but my hands were steady, steadier than I expected. Grandpa was awake, propped against pillows. His eyes followed me as I walked back into the room, a question lingering in their cloudy depths. I sat beside him and said softly, "It's in motion." The knock at the door came minutes later. My parents shuffled out of their room, faces pale, their evening of whiskey and laughter replaced by something else, dread. Two men stood there, my lawyer briefcase in hand and a notary public. Both carried an air of formality that cut through the morning haze. Papers were spread across the dining table. Signatures, verified, seals stamped. My authority was no longer just symbolic. It was enforceable. "This is outrageous," my father muttered, pacing like a caged animal. My mother stood rigid, arms crossed, her lips pressed thin. "Outrageous," I said evenly, "is leaving a 90-year-old veteran in a garage at 95 degrees while you sip cocktails at a country club." The lawyer's pen scratched across the page, the sound, deliberate, final. My parents' protests grew louder. Words like betrayal and humiliation hurled in my direction. But they no longer held the power. The law, the paper, the seal, it was all in my hands now. When the last document was signed, the notary gathered his things and left. My lawyer closed the briefcase with a snap and said, "You're protected now, and so is he." The weight lifted off my chest, but only slightly, because this wasn't about winning. It wasn't about beating them. It was about Grandpa, about making sure his last years were filled with dignity, not shame. I walked back to the couch, kneeling beside him. His hand trembled as it reached for mine. His voice, faint but steady, whispered, "Don't be too hard." They lost their way. Those words stayed with me like a stone in my pocket, heavy, grounding. Even after everything, his heart carried mercy. He could see their flaws, their selfishness, yet still found room for forgiveness. That's who he was. That's the man they had abandoned, the man I was determined to honor. Later that afternoon, the calls began. First a trickle, then a flood. Family, friends, club acquaintances, voices laced with curiosity and judgment. "What's going on? Why is your daughter involved with lawyers? We heard something about your father." My parents' phones buzzed nonstop. I could hear their whispered arguments behind closed doors, the panic in their voices as their carefully constructed image began to unravel. And me, I sat with Grandpa, holding his hand, reading aloud from his old journals. The storm swirled around us, but inside that living room there was peace. A fragile, precious peace, born not of silence, but of truth. Justice was no longer a threat. It was reality. And though the road ahead would be long, though the battles in court and in family dinners would be ugly, I knew we had already taken the most important step. We had reclaimed his dignity. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and paper, that strange blend of bureaucracy and gravity. I guided Grandpa carefully through the doors, his arm looped through mine. He was thinner than ever, his steps uncertain, but his chin was lifted high. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, bending close. His cloudy blue eyes sparkled faintly. "If they want to see me as a burden," he said, "let them watch me stand tall." We passed rows of polished benches, whispers rippling as we entered. Word had spread. Family members, neighbors, even some men from his old unit were here. Faces turned, eyes widened, not in pity, but in recognition. Recognition of a man they had once known or heard about or respected from afar. The judge called us forward. My parents sat stiffly across the aisle, their lawyer shuffling papers, trying to look composed. But their eyes betrayed them, wide, darting, restless. They had expected to face me. They had not expected to face him. Grandpa stood trembling, but refused the offer of a chair. He cleared his throat, his voice raspy, yet clear. "My granddaughter has acted in my best interest," he began. "She found me when others left me behind. She carries the badge of law, But more than that, she carries the badge of family. And today, I want the record to show she has my trust. The room fell into silence. Even the judge leaned forward, listening with rare attentiveness. My parents shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale. For once, they couldn't interrupt, couldn't twist the narrative. The truth came not from me, but from him. When he finished, the room broke into soft applause, unusual in a courtroom, but no one stopped it. The judge's gavel tapped lightly, not to silence the crowd, but to steady the moment. Let the record reflect, he said, that this man's wishes will be honored. Later, outside on the courthouse steps, the late afternoon sun bathed him in gold. Veterans came forward saluting. Old friends clasped his hand. Even strangers murmured words of respect. And as I stood beside him, supporting his frail frame, I realized this was more than justice. This was redemption. Not just for him, but for me too, for the girl who had grown up doubting if her quiet strength meant anything, for the officer who had wrestled with whether law and family could coexist. Now I knew they could. Because standing there surrounded by respect, I understood what Grandpa had been teaching me all along. Justice without honor is hollow. And honor, when defended, outlives us all. The days that followed moved slowly, like the world itself was pausing to let us breathe. The legal storm settled into order. Documents filed, rights, secured protections locked in place. My parents stayed distant, nursing their bruised pride. And maybe in time, they would see what they had done. Maybe. But that was no longer my focus. Every morning, I made breakfast for Grandpa. Eggs the way he liked them, over easy, with toast cut diagonally. He'd chuckle at my clumsy attempts to keep the yolk from breaking, shaking his head with that old sparkle in his eyes. "Still can't cook like your grandma," he teased. "Not trying to," I'd fire back with a grin. "Just keeping you alive." And in those small moments, the weight of everything lifted. One evening, we sat on the porch as the sun slid behind the trees, sky painted in orange and violet. He leaned back in his chair blanket over his knees and whispered, "You've given me something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" I asked. "Dignity." The word settled between us, simple yet monumental. It wasn't revenge he valued. It wasn't victory in court. It was the restoration of his humanity, the recognition that he mattered. That after a lifetime of service, he wasn't disposable. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "You never lost it, Grandpa. They just forgot to see it." His hand found mine, weak but steady. And in that quiet, I felt more certain than ever I hadn't just saved him. He had saved me too. He reminded me that true strength isn't measured by how loud you fight, but by how deeply you honor those who came before you. So here's my reflection for you, the listener, the one walking with me through this story. If you have someone in your life who carried you when you couldn't stand, who gave without asking, who loved without condition, don't wait to show them their worth. Don't let the world or even family strip them of their dignity. Stand for them as they once stood for you. Because one day, all the battles and betrayals fade, but the honor you restore, that lasts forever. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Stories not just about revenge, but about dignity, love, and the quiet strength that endures.